My wife weaponized the silent treatment to break me. I ended my controlling wife's 3-week silence and left her to face court consequences alone. My wife decided I deserved the silent treatment after I had the audacity to suggest she could help with household responsibilities instead of treating me like her personal butler. But here's the thing about playing the silent treatment card. Sometimes the other person decides they actually prefer the quiet. I had just finished a 12-hour shift and walked into what looked like a tornado had hit our kitchen. Dishes were piled high, takeout containers were scattered across the counter, and there she was, sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone like she was researching the cure for cancer. I made the apparently unforgivable mistake of saying, "Hey, do you think you could give me a hand cleaning up before dinner?" The look she gave me could have frozen hell over. "Excuse me? I work too, you know. I'm not your maid." "I never said you were. I just thought we could tackle this together since we both live here." That's when she stood up, grabbed her purse, and delivered the line that would define the next 3 weeks of my life. "Figure it out yourself, and don't expect me to talk to you until you learn some respect." The front door slammed so hard it rattled the windows. When she came back 2 hours later, I thought we'd have a normal conversation about what happened. I was wrong. She walked past me like I was invisible, went straight to the bedroom, and that was it. No goodnight, no eye contact, nothing. I figured she just needed some time to cool off. Day 2 rolled around and still nothing. I tried the reasonable approach first. "Look, if I came across wrong yesterday, we should talk about it." She poured her coffee, walked right past me, and left for work without acknowledging I existed. Day 3, I tried humor. "So this is what marriage counselors mean by communication issues, huh?" Not even a smirk. By day 5, I realized what this actually was. This wasn't about the dishes or respect or any of that surface-level nonsense. This was about control. She decided that freezing me out would make me grovel, apologize for something I shouldn't have to apologize for, and basically train me to never question anything she did again. The pattern became crystal clear. She'd stomp around the house doing exaggerated cleaning motions when I was in the room, slamming cabinet doors and huffing like she was starring in some one-woman show about domestic martyrdom. She'd make herself elaborate meals while I was sitting right there, not offering so much as a napkin. And the social media posts. Those were the real tell. Suddenly her Instagram was full of quotes about knowing your worth and cutting toxic people out of your life. Day 7 was when something clicked for me. I was sitting at the kitchen table eating a sandwich I'd made myself, watching her perform her silent tantrum routine. And I started laughing. Actually laughing. Here was a grown woman who thought giving me the cold shoulder was going to break me down. Instead, it was showing me exactly who I'd married. She stopped mid-huff and stared at me, probably expecting me to explain what was funny. But two could play this game, right? Wrong. I wasn't playing any game at all. I just kept eating my sandwich and scrolling through my phone. By day 10, the house had gotten remarkably peaceful. No arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash. No passive-aggressive comments about how I loaded the dishwasher wrong. No dramatic sighs when I wanted to watch sports instead of her reality TV shows. I was starting to see the upside of this arrangement. She, on the other hand, was getting increasingly frustrated. I could see it in how she'd hover near doorways when I was in a room, clearly wanting to say something but committed to her silent protest. She'd drop things loudly when I was nearby, obviously hoping I'd ask if she was okay. When I didn't take the bait, she'd pick up whatever she dropped with extra force and storm off. Day 12 brought the first crack in her resolve. I was cooking dinner for myself, making enough for one, when she walked into the kitchen and just stood there for a full 5 minutes, waiting for me to offer her some or ask why she wasn't making her own food. I finished cooking, plated my meal, and ate it while she watched. Then I cleaned my dishes, put them away, and left her standing there. Day 15 was when she brought in reinforcements. Her sister called me completely out of the blue, asking if everything was okay at home because my wife seemed really stressed lately. I told her everything was fine on my end. I was just giving my wife the space she'd requested. When her sister tried to dig deeper, I simply said she knows how to end this anytime she wants to have an adult conversation. The next morning, my wife's behavior shifted again. Instead of ignoring me, she started doing things that would normally require a response. She'd stand in front of the TV while I was watching it, rearrange furniture I was using, even accidentally knock over my coffee cup. Each time she'd pause afterward, clearly expecting me to say something. Each time I'd simply clean up, move, or find another spot without acknowledging her existence. Day 18 brought what I can only describe as desperation moves. She started playing music at volume levels that would wake the neighbors, leaving cabinet doors open that I'd have to close to use the kitchen, and even hiding the TV remote. That last one almost made me laugh again, a grown woman hiding the remote like a toddler. But here's what she didn't realize during her 3-week silent tantrum. I was using this time to think. Really think about what my life had become and what I wanted it to be. Every quiet morning, every peaceful evening, every night without manufactured drama was showing me something I hadn't seen clearly before. Day 20 arrived with her pacing around the house like a caged animal. She kept looking at me with this expression that screamed, "Aren't you going to do something?" But I was doing something. I was planning exactly what came next because tomorrow was day 21 and I had a feeling she was going to try to break her silence and pretend this whole childish episode never happened. She probably expected me to be so grateful for her attention that I'd forget why we were here in the first place. She had no idea what she was about to discover. Day 21 started exactly how I expected it would. She walked into the kitchen that morning with this carefully rehearsed casual attitude, like she was about to graciously end my punishment and restore order to the universe. She said, pouring herself coffee like the past 3 weeks had never happened, "I was thinking we could go to that new restaurant downtown tonight, except I wasn't there to hear it." I'd left the house at 5:30 that morning, 2 hours before she usually got up. My overnight bag was already in the car along with everything else. I'd quietly moved out over the past week, while she was too busy performing her silent treatment routine to notice what was actually happening around her. The beauty of someone giving you the silent treatment is that they stop paying attention to anything you do. They're so focused on making sure you notice they're ignoring you, that they become completely oblivious to your actual movements. While she was slamming doors and huffing around the house, I was methodically removing my important documents from our shared filing cabinet. While she was posting cryptic social media quotes, I was transferring half our savings to an individual account I'd opened. While she was hiding remote controls like a petulant child, I was researching temporary housing options. She probably stood in that kitchen for a good 10 minutes waiting for me to respond to her generous offer of dinner out. When the silence stretched too long, she likely called my name, maybe walked through the house looking for me, checked the garage to see if my car was there. That's when she would have found the note I left on the bathroom mirror. Short and to the point. Silence is golden. Enjoy it forever. My phone started ringing around 8:30. I was already at my temporary place, a furnished rental across town, having my first peaceful cup of coffee in 3 weeks. I let it go to voicemail, then it rang again and again. By noon, I had 17 missed calls. The voicemail started apologetic. "Okay, very funny. You made your point. Come home and we'll talk." Then they got frustrated. "This is ridiculous. You can't just leave over something this stupid." By evening, they turned angry. "You're being completely unreasonable. I was trying to fix things this morning and you just disappeared like a coward." I saved every single one. Not because I enjoyed listening to her panic, but because they proved something important. After 20 days of treating me like I didn't exist, she expected me to be grateful for 5 words about dinner plans. After 3 weeks of psychological manipulation disguised as the moral high ground, she thought I should jump at the chance to pretend it never happened. The next morning brought a different strategy. She showed up at my office, somehow having figured out where I was working that day. My coworker mentioned a woman in the lobby asking for me, and I could see her through the window pacing back and forth with that determined look she got when she decided she was going to force a conversation. I stayed at my desk and sent her a text. "The same energy you had for 20 days of silence is the same energy I have for permanent distance." She left, but not quietly. According to building security, she stood in the parking lot yelling at my car for about 15 minutes before driving off. That afternoon, the cavalry arrived. Her mother called, doing that diplomatic voice she used when she thought she was being helpful. "Now, I don't know what happened between you two, but don't you think you're both being a little dramatic? Marriage takes work, and sometimes we have to swallow our pride." "You're absolutely right," I told her. "Someone should have mentioned that to your daughter 3 weeks ago when she decided to shut down all communication because I asked her to help with dishes." The line went quiet for a moment. "She said you were disrespectful and demanding." I said, and I quote, "Hey, think you could give me a hand cleaning up before dinner?" If that's disrespectful and demanding in your family, I can see where she learned her conflict resolution skills. Her mother tried a few more diplomatic approaches, but I could tell the conversation had shifted. She was starting to realize her daughter might have painted a very different picture of what actually happened. Day 3 of my new arrangement brought her sister to my temporary place. She knocked for about 10 minutes before I finally opened the door. "This is insane," she started immediately. "She's miserable. You're being cruel." Cruel? I'm giving her exactly what she wanted. She specifically told me not to expect her to talk to me. I'm just honoring her request long term. You know that's not what she meant. Actually, that's exactly what she meant for 20 days. The only difference is I decided I liked the arrangement better than she did. Her sister tried the whole family loyalty angle, how we needed to work things out, how I was being stubborn. But something interesting happened during that conversation. She let slip that my wife had been calling her every day for the past week, increasingly frantic about how to fix this without having to actually apologize or acknowledge what she'd done. "She's scared," her sister finally admitted. "She didn't think you'd actually leave. Then she didn't know me as well as she thought she did." By the end of the week, I'd heard from her father, 2 of her friends, and even our neighbor, all trying different approaches to convince me to come home and work things out. Each conversation revealed more about how she was spinning the situation and how desperate she was getting. But here's what none of them understood. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt or seeking revenge or trying to teach her a lesson. I was just done. 20 days of silent treatment had given me something I hadn't expected: clarity. Complete, crystal clear understanding of who I'd been married to and what my life could be without the constant drama and manipulation. The rental place I'd found was small but comfortable. I could eat when I wanted, watch what I wanted, and go to bed without wondering what mood she'd be in the next morning, or what minor infraction would trigger the next emotional punishment. My phone buzzed with another text from her. "Please just come home. We need to talk about this like adults." I looked at that message for a long time. 21 days ago, I would have jumped at those words. The old me would have seen that as progress, as her finally being ready to have the conversation I'd been trying to have for 3 weeks. But the new me noticed something different. Even in her plea to talk like adults, there was no acknowledgement of what she'd done. No apology for 3 weeks of childish behavior, no recognition that her actions had consequences. Just an expectation that I should come running because she'd finally decided she was ready to grace me with her words again. I deleted the message without responding because I'd learned something valuable during those 20 days of silence. Sometimes the best response to manipulation is to show someone exactly what life looks like without you in it. And sometimes that life looks pretty good. 2 weeks into my new living situation, she escalated to what I can only describe as full-scale psychological warfare. The phone calls had stopped, but the real manipulation was just getting started. It began with social media. Suddenly her Instagram was flooded with posts about forgiveness, second chances, and how real love means fighting for each other, each post carefully crafted to make her look like the devoted wife whose husband had inexplicably abandoned their marriage over nothing. The comment section was exactly what she'd hoped for. "You deserve so much better, hun. Some men just can't handle a strong woman. He doesn't know what he lost." What her followers didn't know was that she'd blocked me from seeing these posts directly. She wanted me to hear about them secondhand, which meant she was counting on mutual friends to tell me how heartbroken and dignified she was being online. The first friend who mentioned it was Dave from work. "Hey man, I saw your wife's posts. Rough situation. Are you guys working things out?" "Depends," I said. "Did her posts mention the 3 weeks she refused to speak to me because I asked her to help with dishes?" Dave's expression changed. "Oh, no. She just said you guys were having communication issues and you'd moved out suddenly." Communication issues, that's one way to put it. But the social media campaign was just the opening move. Next came the strategic appearances. She started showing up places she knew I'd be, the gym I went to after work, the grocery store I shopped at on weekends, always looking devastated, always making sure other people saw her looking devastated. The most obvious attempt was at the coffee shop I'd been frequenting near my new place. She walked in while I was reading on a Saturday morning, ordered something she didn't even like, and sat 3 tables away, close enough that everyone could see us in the same space, far enough that it didn't look like she was directly confronting me. She kept glancing over with these meaningful looks, probably hoping I'd come over and start a conversation. When I didn't take the bait, she started sighing loudly and touching her wedding ring while staring out the window with a pained expression. The performance was so obvious that the barista eventually asked if I knew the woman who seemed upset. "Yeah," I told him. "She's working through some things." After an hour of theatrical suffering, she gave up and left, but not before making sure to walk past my table slowly, giving me one last chance to stop her. I kept reading my book. The next week brought a more direct approach. She convinced her mother to call me with a medical emergency story, chest pains, trip to the emergency room, asking for me specifically. I drove to the hospital immediately, genuinely concerned despite everything. When I got there, she was sitting in the waiting room looking perfectly healthy, scrolling through her phone. "Where's your mother?" I asked. She looked up with this hopeful expression. "She's fine. I just needed you to come so we could talk somewhere neutral." I stared at her for a moment, processing what she'd just admitted. "You faked a medical emergency to manipulate me into meeting you." "I didn't fake anything. I said she had chest pains, and she did. They were probably stress-related because of what you're putting this family through." The audacity was breathtaking. Even when caught in an outright lie, she found a way to make it my fault. "You used your mother's health to manipulate me. Do you understand how twisted that is? I used the truth to get you here because you're being unreasonable. We're married. We should be able to talk. We could have talked any time in the past 5 weeks. You chose 3 weeks of silence instead. That was different." "No, it wasn't. It was you trying to control me then, and it's you trying to control me now. The only difference is your methods." I left her sitting in that hospital waiting room and drove home. But something had fundamentally shifted in that conversation. She'd shown me there was literally no line she wouldn't cross to get what she wanted: medical emergencies, public manipulation, family pressure. Everything was fair play in her mind. That weekend she tried a different tactic. I came home to find her car in the parking lot of my rental complex. She'd somehow figured out which unit was mine and was sitting on the front steps like she belonged there. "We need to discuss practical things," she said when I walked up. "Bills, taxes, our lease. You can't just pretend our life together doesn't exist." She was right about one thing. There were practical matters to handle, but I'd already been handling them. I'd called our landlord and explained I'd moved out permanently. I'd switched the utilities that were in my name. I'd contacted our insurance companies. "Everything's been taken care of," I told her. "What do you mean everything's been taken care of?" "I mean I've handled the practical stuff. You don't need to worry about it." The color drained from her face. "You can't just make unilateral decisions about our life." "Sure I can. You demonstrated that beautifully for 3 weeks when you made a unilateral decision to shut down our marriage because I asked you to help clean the kitchen. That's not what happened, and you know it. That's exactly what happened. And now you're discovering that actions have consequences beyond what you intended." She stood up from the steps and I could see her shifting into that aggressive mode she used when she felt cornered. "You're throwing away 7 years of marriage over hurt feelings." "I'm not throwing anything away. You did that when you decided psychological manipulation was an appropriate response to a reasonable request. I'm just acknowledging reality. So what? We're just done? Just like that? We were done 3 weeks ago. You just didn't realize it yet." She tried several more approaches that evening: tears, anger, promises to change, threats about what divorce would cost me. But something was different in how I heard all of it. Instead of emotional manipulation, I just heard a person desperately trying to avoid the consequences of her own choices. When she finally left, I sat in my quiet apartment and realized something profound had happened over the past few weeks. I wasn't the same person who'd asked her to help with dishes 2 months ago. That man had been trained to absorb her moods, manage her emotions, and take responsibility for her happiness. This man was different. This man had learned that he could live peacefully without constant drama. This man had discovered that he didn't need to negotiate with someone who used silence as a weapon. My phone buzzed with a text. "I'm not giving up on us." I read it, set the phone down, and went to make dinner, for one. 3 weeks after I'd made my departure permanent, she shifted into what I can only describe as scorched earth mode. The tears and public performances had failed. The family interventions hadn't worked. The fake emergencies had backfired. So she decided if she couldn't get me back, she'd make sure everyone knew it was my fault. The first sign was when my boss called me into his office on a Monday morning. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be straight with me. Are you having any personal issues that might affect your work?" I knew immediately what had happened. "Did someone contact you about my personal life?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I got a call over the weekend. Someone claiming to be concerned about your mental state said you'd abandoned your family and might be having some kind of breakdown. That someone was my wife." "No, I'm not having a breakdown. I left an unhealthy relationship, and apparently she's decided to make that everyone else's problem too." My boss nodded slowly. "I figured it might be something like that. Your work hasn't suffered at all. If anything, you seem more focused lately, but I had to ask." "I understand, and I appreciate you handling it professionally. Just keep doing what you're doing, and maybe get your personal phone number changed if this continues. That afternoon, I discovered she'd also called my gym, claiming I'd used her credit card without permission to pay for my membership. The manager was apologetic when he explained they'd had to freeze my account pending resolution. I showed him my bank statement proving I've been paying for my own membership for 2 years. "This is harassment," he said, shaking his head. "We see this sometimes during divorces. I'll restore your account, but you might want to document this kind of behavior. Document it." That was good advice. By Wednesday, 3 of my friends had received calls from her. Each conversation followed the same script. She was worried about my mental health. I'd become verbally aggressive before leaving. She was concerned I might be having some kind of psychological episode. The friend who knew me best shut it down immediately. "Look, I don't know what happened between you two, but the guy you're describing isn't the man I know. Maybe you should focus on your own situation instead of trying to destroy his reputation." But the damage was spreading. She called my brother, my parents, even tracked down my college roommate on Facebook. Each person got a slightly different version of the story, but the theme was consistent. I'd snapped without warning and abandoned our marriage, possibly due to mental instability. What she didn't anticipate was that some of these people would call me directly to check on my well-being. My mother was the first. "Honey, I got a very disturbing call from your wife. She says you've been acting erratically and she's worried about you. What's going on?" I explained the real situation, the 3 weeks of silent treatment, the manipulation attempts, the fake emergency. My mother listened without interrupting. "She gave you the silent treatment for asking her to help with housework. And now she's telling people you're mentally unstable. That's the situation. Well, that explains a lot about your marriage that I never understood before." By the end of the week, her campaign had backfired spectacularly. The people who knew me well saw through her stories immediately. The people who didn't know me well enough to judge got suspicious when a woman started calling them with detailed psychological assessments of her own husband. But she wasn't done yet. Friday evening, I came home to find police officers waiting outside my building. "Are you the resident of Unit 12? "Yes, officer." "Is there a problem?" "We got a wellness check request. Someone reported that you might be a danger to yourself or others." I felt that familiar surge of anger but kept my voice calm. "Let me guess. The report came from my wife, who I separated from several weeks ago." The officers exchanged glances. "Can we come inside and just verify that you're okay? It's routine for this type of call." I invited them in, showed them around my clean, organized apartment, answered their questions about my mental state and recent behavior. They were professional but clearly skeptical about the report they'd received. "Sir, I have to ask, are you having any thoughts of harming yourself or anyone else?" "Officer, the only harm I'm thinking about involves hiring a lawyer to stop this harassment campaign." The older officer nodded. "That might not be a bad idea. We see this pattern sometimes. Someone doesn't get the response they want from a breakup, so they try to use official channels to force contact or create problems." After they left, I sat in my living room staring at my phone. She'd actually called the police and suggested I might be dangerous. A woman who'd lived with me for 7 years had just told law enforcement that I posed a threat to public safety. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with someone who was simply hurt or angry about our separation. I was dealing with someone willing to destroy my reputation, my career, and potentially my freedom because I'd refused to accept her emotional manipulation. I called the lawyer I'd consulted about the separation and scheduled an emergency appointment. Saturday morning brought a new twist. My landlord called to inform me that someone had filed a complaint claiming I was violating the terms of my lease by engaging in domestic violence. The complaint alleged that I'd threatened my wife and that she feared for her safety if I remained in the area. "I know it's probably nonsense," my landlord said, "but I'm required to investigate any domestic violence allegations. Can you come in Monday with documentation about your separation?" "Absolutely, and I'll be bringing my lawyer." That evening I made a decision. I'd been reactive for 3 weeks, responding to her escalating attempts to force me back into a relationship I no longer wanted. But being reactive wasn't working. It was time to get proactive. I spent the weekend documenting everything. Every phone call, every text message, every public appearance, every false report to authorities. I printed out her social media posts, saved voicemails, and created a timeline of her behavior since I'd left. By Sunday night, I had a comprehensive file that told a clear story. A woman who'd used silent treatment as emotional manipulation had escalated to harassment, false reports, and attempts to destroy her husband's reputation when he refused to return to an unhealthy relationship. Monday morning, I walked into my lawyer's office with 40 pages of documentation and a clear request. I want to file for divorce, and I want a restraining order. This person has demonstrated that she's willing to involve my employer, law enforcement, and anyone else she can manipulate to force me back into a relationship I've clearly ended. I need legal protection from someone who's proven she has no boundaries. My lawyer reviewed the documentation carefully. This is actually a very strong case for harassment. The pattern is clear and escalating. When someone starts making false reports to police, judges take that seriously. How long will this take? We can file the restraining order petition today. The divorce will take longer, but given this behavior pattern, I don't think you'll have problems with the court understanding why reconciliation isn't an option. That afternoon, she was served with papers at our old house. The restraining order prohibited her from contacting me directly, going to my workplace, or making false reports to authorities. According to the process server, she was genuinely shocked when she realized I'd taken legal action. Apparently, she'd expected me to continue absorbing her escalating behavior indefinitely. But the most telling part was her immediate response. Within an hour of being served, she'd called her sister, her mother, and 3 friends to complain that I was using lawyers to intimidate her and making their private business public. The woman who'd spent 3 weeks involving everyone from my boss to the police in our personal issues was suddenly concerned about privacy the moment she faced legal consequences for her actions. My phone, which she was now legally prohibited from calling, remained blissfully silent for the first time in a month. That night, I cooked myself a nice dinner, watched whatever I wanted on television, and went to bed knowing that tomorrow would bring more of the same peaceful routine. 21 days of silence had taught me to value peace. The weeks of harassment that followed had taught me to protect it. The restraining order changed everything overnight. For the first time in weeks, my phone wasn't buzzing with desperate texts or manipulative voicemails. My workplace returned to normal. The constant anxiety of wondering what false report she'd file next simply disappeared. But the quiet didn't last as long as I'd hoped. 2 weeks after the court order, she found a loophole. Since she couldn't contact me directly, she started using intermediaries. Her sister called to discuss practical matters that supposedly required my input. Her mother needed to clarify some financial details for their family records. Even the mailman started getting extra friendly, casually mentioning that my wife had asked him about my forwarding address. The most brazen attempt came through our shared dentist's office. The receptionist called to confirm an appointment that had supposedly been made for both of us. When I explained that we were separated and had a no-contact order, she got flustered. Oh my. She specifically said this was your idea. She even knew your work schedule to suggest the timing. Classic manipulation. She'd studied my routines for 7 years and was using that knowledge to create situations where I'd have to respond to her indirectly. But I'd learned something valuable about boundaries during our separation. They only work if you enforce them consistently. Every single attempt at indirect contact got the same response. Please refer her to my attorney. The dentist's office, the insurance company, our former landlord, anyone she tried to use as a go-between got the same professional redirection. Within a few days, people stopped taking her calls about my business. The real breakthrough came when her sister finally called me directly, not to pass along a message, but to ask what had actually happened between us. She won't give me straight answers, her sister admitted. First she said you guys had a fight about housework. Then it was about respect. Now she's saying you became verbally abusive and unstable. I'm getting 3 different stories. I gave her the simple truth. 3 weeks of silent treatment over a request to help with dishes, followed by escalating manipulation when I refused to pretend it never happened. Wait, she gave you the silent treatment for 3 weeks? 20 days to be exact. There was a long pause. She did that to me once when we were kids. Didn't speak to me for a month because I borrowed her sweater without asking. I thought she'd outgrown that behavior. Apparently not. And you just left after 20 days of silence. I left on day 21 when she finally decided she was ready to talk again. By then, I'd realized I preferred the quiet. Her sister laughed, actually laughed. That's probably the healthiest response anyone's ever had to her tantrums. I usually cave and apologize just to get her speaking again. That conversation revealed something important. I wasn't the first person she'd used silent treatment on. It was her go-to method for controlling people, And it had worked her entire life because everyone around her eventually gave in to stop the discomfort. I was apparently the first person who'd ever walked away instead. The final piece of the puzzle came when my lawyer called with an update on the divorce proceedings. She's requesting mediation, says she wants to work things out amicably without involving the courts. What do you think? I think she's realizing that her behavior over the past 2 months has created a very strong case for you in divorce court. She's probably hoping mediation will let her avoid having all of this become part of the official record. Will you be there? Absolutely, and I'd recommend keeping it simple. You've documented everything thoroughly, the pattern is clear. Sometimes the best strategy is just to let someone's own actions speak for themselves. The mediation was scheduled for the following week. For the first time since day 21, I'd be in the same room with her. But I wasn't the same person who'd asked her to help with dishes 5 months ago. That man had been conditioned to manage her moods and absorb her manipulation. This man had learned that some behaviors don't deserve tolerance, and some relationships don't deserve effort. The night before mediation, I made myself a decent dinner, watched the sunset from my balcony, and went to bed early. No anxiety, no rehearsing arguments, no wondering what mood she'd be in, just the comfortable routine of a man who'd finally learned the difference between being alone and being at peace. The mediation room was sterile and corporate, the kind of place designed to strip emotion from difficult conversations. She arrived 15 minutes early and was already seated when my lawyer and I walked in for the first time in months. I saw her without the theatrical performances or strategic positioning. Just a woman who looked tired and smaller than I remembered. The mediator introduced the process and asked if either party wanted to make an opening statement. She immediately launched into a prepared speech about how marriage required forgiveness, how everyone makes mistakes, and how walking away without trying to repair things was abandoning our commitment. When she finished, the mediator looked at me. Would you like to respond? Not really. I think the documentation speaks for itself. My lawyer slid a folder across the table. 23 pages of text messages, voicemails, police reports, employer contacts, and social media screenshots. A complete timeline of her behavior from day 21 through the restraining order. She glanced through the first few pages, and her face went pale. You documented everything. Everything. The mediator reviewed the file silently for several minutes. When he looked up, his expression had shifted from neutral to concerned. This represents a significant pattern of harassment and manipulation. Can you explain your reasoning behind these actions? She tried several approaches. The behavior was taken out of context. I was exaggerating normal emotional responses. She'd been desperate to save our marriage and maybe went too far. So you acknowledge that filing false police reports and contacting his employer were inappropriate? The mediator asked. I never filed false reports. I was genuinely concerned about his mental state. Based on what evidence? He left suddenly without trying to work things out. According to this timeline, you refused to speak to him for 20 days. How was he supposed to work things out? That's when her composure finally cracked. He was supposed to apologize. He was supposed to realize that dismissing my feelings and treating me like hired help was wrong. He was supposed to fight for our marriage instead of just giving up. The room went quiet. Even she seemed to realize what she'd just admitted. So the silent treatment was intended as punishment until he apologized for asking you to help with household chores, the mediator clarified. That's not how I would describe it. How would you describe it? She couldn't answer, because any honest description would confirm exactly what everyone in that room already understood. She'd used emotional manipulation as a control mechanism. And when it backfired, she'd escalated to harassment and false accusations. The mediator turned to me. What outcome are you seeking from this divorce? Simple division of assets, no alimony, and continuation of the restraining order until the divorce is finalized. That's extremely unfair, she interjected. I gave up career opportunities to support his ambitions. I deserve spousal support. My lawyer opened another folder. These are financial records showing that both parties worked full-time throughout the marriage and contributed equally to household income. There's no evidence of career sacrifice or financial dependency. The mediation lasted 3 hours, but the outcome was determined in that first exchange. When someone's entire case relies on being the victim, it falls apart quickly when their own documented behavior proves otherwise. By the end, she'd agreed to every term I'd requested: no alimony, equal asset division, and an extended no-contact agreement. Her lawyer, who'd barely spoken during the proceedings, looked relieved to have it finished. As we gathered our papers, she made one final attempt. This isn't how I wanted things to end. I looked at her for the first time that day. You ended things on day 1 of your silent treatment. Everything since then has just been paperwork. 6 months later, I got a text from her sister. She's engaged to someone she met 3 months ago. Thought you should know in case she tries to contact you about the timing. I deleted the message without responding. The woman who'd given me 20 days of silence to teach me a lesson had moved on to someone new in less time than our separation process took to complete. But the lesson she'd actually taught me was more valuable than she could have imagined. She'd shown me that I could live peacefully without constant drama, that I didn't need to negotiate with manipulation, and that sometimes the best response to someone's worst behavior is to let them experience the natural consequences of their choices. The apartment I found during those first chaotic weeks became a house I bought the following year. The quiet routine I discovered during her silent treatment became a lifestyle I genuinely enjoyed. The boundaries I'd learned to enforce became standards I wouldn't compromise again. She'd wanted to punish me with silence until I learned my place. Instead, she taught me that sometimes silence really is golden, and that the right person's absence can be more valuable than the wrong person's presence. The last voicemail she'd left demanding that I come home and talk like adults is still saved on my phone. Sometimes I listen to it just to remember how different my life sounded when someone else controlled the volume. These days, the only voices in my house are the ones I choose to hear. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.